Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing my May wrap-up. I am trying to break my recent habit of posting very late monthly wrap-ups, so hopefully this one will go up in a reasonable-ish time frame. But in May, I read 15 books. A few of them, I did have a few novellas this month, which could have also helped kind of get my numbers up. 8 of the books, I think, were fantasy, and then the other 7 were contemporary romance. So still like a good showing of contemporary romance, which like this is just, you know, unprecedented in my reading life to read this much contemporary romance in one year, but it continues, and I'm having a good time. This month I feel like I did have quite a few like pretty solid reads, but I also had some that were kind of disappointing, so we had some real range in the month. As I've been doing for the last few months, I am going to split it into the fantasy that I read and then all of the contemporary romance that I read. And you know, actually I've been wondering, do you have an opinion about how wrap-ups are structured? Because usually I just go in the order that I read the books throughout the month, but the last couple months I've been kind of splitting them because I have such a distinct like split in the genres that I'm reading. I've just kind of been grouping them as fantasy and then contemporary romance. But let me know if you have any opinions about like how these kind of wrap-ups are structured. But we'll get started today with fantasy, and as per usual, starting with my physical read. This month I only had 2 physical reads. I did actually have a few ebooks that I read, which is unusual for me, but only 2 physical reads, so we'll start there. The first one is The Horse Goddess by Morgan Llewellyn. This was my channel buddy read that we buddy read over on Discord, which was very fun. Llewellyn is known for writing mostly like Celtic, Irish historical fiction, although some of her books kind of maybe lean into historical fantasy, such as this one, because this is sort of an origin story for the goddess Epona, who is a goddess of horses and fertility. And so there is a magical element tied to the spirit world and the spirituality of the people in this book. And so we are following our main character Epona from a young age. It's not stated exactly how old she is, but the book opens on a scene of her woman-making ceremony where she is kind of coming of age, becoming an adult within her tribe. And then from there we're following her as she decides that she doesn't want to follow the path that her mother and the kind of priest of their tribe have set out for her. And so she runs away from home and joins the Scythians, and has to learn this whole new culture, this new way of living, this new world. And there is a big like culture clash is a central theme within this. There is also a romance at the center of the story, and we are following Epona as she is kind of coming into herself, learning more about herself and the world and how different different cultures can be, and also maybe learning a little bit about some of these magical powers and her connection to the spirit world. And ultimately, this one didn't really work for me for a few reasons. Actually, before I get into that, I will say the probably one good thing about this was the writing, I think, was very readable. So even though there were a lot of parts of this that weren't like really working for me, I never felt like I got bogged down in it because it was so easy to read. So that was a benefit. But overall, I think that the main, like, I don't know, I had multiple issues with this. You know, maybe the least of which, but still important to me, is that I felt like the characterization wasn't particularly like deep or complex, and so just across the board I wasn't very engaged with the characters. But beyond that, the central romance in this was not one that I could get on board with for so many reasons. One of which being that our main character in this is very young. It is never stated exactly how old she is, but I am assuming that she is probably around 13, maybe 15 max. And she gets into this relationship with a Scythian man who, as far as I can tell, is a full adult, and it is in a situation where she is entering into this new culture that he comes from, this culture that is highly patriarchal, very misogynistic. He is much older than her, and she is now all alone, completely dependent on him. And yet their relationship is framed as being very like we're supposed to be very invested in it, and it's supposed to be like romantic. And even on the back of the book, it describes them as a stormy love affair. I'm like, she is a child. That's not what's happening here. And so that was another like core issue that I had with this, because the relationship between these two characters is very central to the story, and I was like, I cannot forget any of this and get on board with it. One of the other big issues that I had with this was the way that the Scythian culture was represented, because as far as I can tell, it was represented very inaccurately. The way that the Celtic culture, which is the one that Epona is coming from, the way the Celtic culture is represented is as being relatively like, you know, progressive and egalitarian for the time period. And in contrast, the Scythians are represented as being very patriarchal and misogynistic, very simple and backward in comparison. And that was something that I was wondering how accurate that was. So I was trying to, like, you know, do a little sleuthing to see, like, what do we know about the Scythians? You know, it's hard to know a lot about ancient cultures, but from what I could find, it seems like what we know of Scythian culture is that that's actually very inaccurate, that especially in their attitudes towards women, that Scythian women were able to hold positions of power. They could be hunters, they could be warriors. So there are like different layers of issues that I have with this. One is just the basic like accuracy of it in a historical fiction, and also like I understand that what she was going for was to create contrast, because a central part of this story is the culture clash as Epona is kind of coming into this new and different culture. But it also set up this kind of dichotomy that was like West good, progressive, and East is like bad, patriarchal, backwards. And especially because that seems to be historically inaccurate, that also was an issue that I had with this. So there were multiple levels why this book was not working for me. If I had been reading this by myself, I actually may not have been able to finish it. As readable as it was, I may not have gotten through it. But I was able to finish it because we were buddy reading it, so even if the book itself was not a hit for me, I still had a really fun time getting to chat with everybody and see reactions and experiences with it. So it was still like a worthwhile read because of that. So this, I think I gave 2 stars. The 2 stars mostly just for the readability of it, honestly. Also, though, at no point does she become a horse goddess. It did not deliver on the title. She does heal some horses along the way and gets like a reputation for being good with horses and healing them, but she never becomes a horse goddess. So it really didn't deliver on the title. All right, now in the total opposite direction, my other physical read was my favorite book that I read this month, and honestly is probably going to be at least one of my favorite books of the year. It was a huge surprise for me because I went in with so little expectation, but I read The Wolf and His King by Finn Longman, and I adored this. This is so perfectly up my alley, but also is so like very much its own thing. And it is also a book that I'm like, I want to talk about this endlessly, but I also kind of don't want to say too much, you know? It's a book that I think should just be experienced. But this is a standalone historical fantasy about a medieval werewolf. This is a story that is a retelling of, I think, like a 12th century story. And so in this, we are following Bisclavaret. Bisclavaret? Bisclavaret. It's a French name. I'm trying my best. So in this, we are following Bisclavaret, and he is the son of a nobleman. He was not able to inherit his father's lands, and so he's also been living in isolation because he spontaneously turns into a werewolf with no knowledge of how or why or how to control this transformation. When one day the king of the land dies, his son is set to inherit, and so Bisclavaret's cousin convinces him to go and pledge his fealty to this new king in hopes that the king will restore his father's lands to Bisclavaret. So that is what kind of sets off the story and brings our two main characters, which are Bisclavaret and the king, together. However, one of the things that is so interesting about this book is the way that it is structured, the way that it is written. We have three perspectives. The first is, of course, Bisclavaret. It is written in third person, and he is the only named character in the entire book. The second perspective is the king. That is all in second person, so it is all told as like, you are doing this and you are feeling this. And then the last perspective that we have is the perspective of the wolf. So, and this one is written in verse and it is told in first person. And so that adds to kind of the immediacy of the experience of the wolf. And this structure of it, the having only one named character, is all so interesting and it works so well. Personally, I never found it confusing to follow like whose perspective we were in and what was happening. I also just absolutely loved the writing. Like the prose in this is absolutely beautiful. So emotional and just heart-wrenching. This book is just filled with so much longing, whether it is romantic longing or longing for a life or a self that feels out of reach. There is just so much longing in these characters and in the way that is written. It just like pulls at your heart. The writing itself reminds me actually very much in style of Kay Ancrum's writing and the way that I feel reading her books, but in an adult historical fantasy, which is like the perfect, like I love Kay Ancrum. She's one of my favorite authors. I love the way that she writes, but like adult historical fantasy is my favorite thing. So put that writing in this context and I am obsessed. And very similarly, where with Kay Ancrum's writing, it feels very raw and visceral in the emotion and that longing for connection and for, you know, a self or a life that you want. All of those similar feelings are in this. This is just so incredibly and completely up my alley, and I am so obsessed with this. And it is so beautiful, and like I don't even know what else to say. This was amazing. I gave this 5 stars. If I was a person who gave 6 stars, I would give this 6 stars. Like, I would give this 1,000,000 stars. This was incredible. But let's get into the fantasy that I listened to as audiobooks. First up, let's talk about Green and Deadly Things by Jen Lyons. This was another like 2026 release. It was one of my most anticipated releases for the first half of the year. It is another one that has knights in it, so I was very excited about it, and it was going to have like evil nature magic. But I ended up listening to this as an audiobook because I had heard some mixed reviews for it, and so because of that, I went and read like a little sample of it on Libby to see what I thought of the writing, and I didn't feel like the writing was anything that was like really gonna be great for me, so I decided to do the audiobook. I think that was the right choice for me because the writing, I think, even in audiobook form, I was not a huge fan of, not because it was bad, but it just was a tone and style that I don't particularly like that much. I felt like the dialogue in particular was overly modern in a way that I found distracting instead of like fun and cheeky, and it just wasn't a style that I'm particularly into, and also to some extent not what I wanted out of this type of book, which like that's a me problem. But I guess I didn't explain what this is about. This is set in a world where there is chaos magic and order magic, and there is this order of knights who exists essentially to keep chaos at bay. But there is this like long history and lore that has been forgotten over time. Our main character is someone who is trying to become a knight of this order when he accidentally awakens a sleeping like sorceress from 1,000 or more years ago, right at a time when this kind of like final battle between order and chaos is about to happen. And so the two of them are kind of traveling together, trying to evade capture from various sides in order to kind of find their way to this point where they can kind of save the world from both order and chaos. This just like didn't really land for me. I mentioned the writing wasn't really my jam. I think that one of the things that I really want, like in books in general, but especially if you're going to have like botanical body horror, is I want vibes. I want the atmosphere, and this just wasn't delivering like atmosphere along with the horror. So if there isn't this like dark, horrific or eerie atmosphere to it, when you get to the horror, to me it doesn't feel like, I don't feel anything. I just kind of go like, gross, okay, like it just doesn't do anything for me. Like, I need the vibes. I ultimately never felt like I was fully bought into this world and the stakes, and I never fully got invested in these characters. There is a romance at the center of this, which also, like, I never really got into these characters and their relationship. There are a lot of elements of this story that I liked, and I just lacked the investment. One of the things that I did really like about this was that there was a conversation that it had about kind of how a organization or a mission, this order, you know, how it changes from the original, like there's like a game of telephone, you know, over time you have this original purpose, and then as things shift over time, it gets further and further from the original intent. It also talked about how language changes over time because we have this awakened person from like 1,000 years ago and they're speaking the same language, but words and meanings and the context of it has changed so much. And I thought all of those conversations were really interesting. It also had this thing that I'm like, I should love this, where there was a lot of like our main character kind of questioning this order that he has been a part of, questioning the true motives and intentions, what has been hidden from him. We get some interesting reveals about you know, his life and all of this. And yet it just felt like every time something new was learned about the world, the history, the order, his own past, whatever it was, it always felt like it was accepted so quickly that I'm like, this is telling you new information that is fully turning your whole worldview on its head, and you're just like, got it. And like, I don't know, I needed more internal conflict over some of this. So I ended up giving this 3 stars because I think it had some really good ideas and there were things that I did like about it, and I liked it enough that I finished it. Like, I am very willing to DNF things, and I did finish this. But there was always a level of investment that I just was missing, and I'm not 100% sure why. Next up is A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping by Sangu Mandana. This is a very cute, cozy fantasy about a witch who is the innkeeper for a magical inn and the eccentric people who stay there. At the beginning of the book, the main character did some illegal magic, got kicked out of the Society of Witches, lost her magic, and now a few years later, she is at a point where she, you know, she's always kind of trying to figure out how she can get her magic back. And when a grumpy historian and his younger sister show up at the inn, that might be the perfect person to help her solve this problem. So this was very cute, very fun. I think that I've kind of been on, like, I've been reading a number of books about like magical inns recently. I wanted to pick this up because last month I read The Faraway Inn by Sarah Beth Durst, and I really enjoyed that. So I picked this one up also. If I'm comparing this to The Faraway Inn, I think both were very fun. They of course have kind of different vibes. One of the biggest differences though that I noticed was that in The Faraway Inn, the inn itself is much more of like a character and much more central to the story, whereas in A Witch's Guide to Magical Innkeeping, the inn itself is not as like central to the story. It's just kind of there as like a location, which is fine, but that is just sort of like, in terms of books with magical inns, this is kind of just like a different vibe. But I found this just very fun. The tone and writing of it reminded me a lot of Talia Hibbert, who I love Talia Hibbert. So this had kind of a similar like cheekiness to it that I really enjoyed. I did think the romance was very fun. The romance is kind of like grumpy. It's not grumpy sunshine. They're both kind of grumpy, and I love that for them. It was so fun. But even though this one didn't necessarily have like the inn as kind of like a character, it did have the like very fun, eccentric like guests at the inn, and I really enjoyed their side characters as well. So this one was very fun, gave it 4 stars. Speaking of magical inns, I also read Clean Sweep by Ilona Andrews. I think that's who it was. This book, not what I was expecting. I just was like, ooh, magical inn. And then I was like, this is urban fantasy, which I probably should have expected because I think that this author mostly writes urban fantasy. So maybe that's my bad. I should have just known that. But this also took a real weird turn and became sci-fi urban fantasy, because all of the magical creatures like the werewolves and the vampires and all of that are from other planets, and went through like wormholes to get to Earth, and Earth is like neutral ground where all of these other planets can like come to. And the purpose of an innkeeper is a specific, has like specific magical abilities, is that they are meant to be this kind of neutral ground to house these extraterrestrial beings, so that they're not just like out in the general population bothering Earthlings, and it's just kind of like keeping them safe. And so our main character in this is an innkeeper and has this like magical connection to her inn and the land that it is on. And it starts out where they are finding that pets and other animals in the neighborhood are being killed by something, and a werewolf has recently moved to town, and so she is like, this is your territory, you are supposed to be protecting it, so get it together. And so the two of them end up kind of finding out what has moved in recently, what is killing all of these like animals and pets, because they want to protect their neighborhood before it starts killing people and potentially exposing the magic, which I guess isn't really magic because they're aliens, not magical creatures. But this book ended up just being very different from what I was expecting it to be. I still thought it was very fun. One of the things I really liked was that our main character, like, her powers were cool. Like, when she was in her house in the inn and on her land, she had very cool powers. She has this very cool symbiotic relationship with the inn itself. And that was very fun. I also enjoyed that she was pretty knowledgeable about the magical world. I feel like, honestly, I don't read a lot of urban fantasy, so maybe this is wrong, but my impression from the little urban fantasy I have read over the years is very often our main character is kind of naive to the world of magic, or like new to it, and so then it is being explained to her. And I enjoyed that she actually was already very like clued in to everything about, I mean, she doesn't know everything, but she is fairly knowledgeable about this, like, you know, magical or extraterrestrial, I guess, world. It did also seem like it was setting up a classic love triangle with her and a werewolf and a vampire, so not sure where that's gonna go. I don't know if I would continue on with the series because this just really isn't my thing, but it was fun and I gave it 3.5 stars. Then I also read 2 books in the Penric and Desdemona series for my chronological reread. I read my last reread and then finally caught up, read the newest book. Of course, the minute I finished it and I went and I was looking at the series, found out she just published another book in the series. So immediately I am back to being behind. I thought that I had caught up, but no. But I can't be too bad about it because I do enjoy this series and it's fun to have a new book to read in the series. But the 2 that I read, so the reread was Penric and the Bandit, and the new to me was The Adventures of the Demonic Ox. And so of these 2, Penric and the Bandit, probably my favorite book in the entire series. It is so fun to me because what I love about this one is that Penric is traveling. He is looking for some like potentially lost like scrolls, and along the way he encounters a bandit who is like, oh, this like, you know, scholarly guy traveling alone. I'm gonna follow him to find whatever like treasure he's looking for, and then I'll steal it from him and kill him. And the 2 of them are hilarious together because this bandit has this whole plan, and then Penric, of course, can see right through him. And it's just like, he 100% knows what's going on. And he's like, well, but you know, my god is a god of thieves, and so, you know, I have to take care of him. Maybe I can help him. And so he's like, the 2 of them just like on this on on this expedition together are so funny to me. This is my favorite in the series. I gave that one 4 stars. The Adventures of the Demonic Ox was not a favorite for me. This is one that felt a little bit more like filler. So that one I gave 3.5 stars because I just generally enjoy the series and it's just kind of worth reading for me, but not my favorite. All right, and now the last of my fantasy, once again, is fantasy romance, kind of bridging the gap between my 2 categories. We have The Fake Divination Offense by Sarah Rosh, which is the 2nd book in the Romance and Magic, or is it Magic and Romance series. I read the 1st book, which was something about rival wizards. I've already forgotten the name, but I read that last month and loved it. So read the sequel that just came out. I think it came out in May and I read it in May. And this one was fun, but did not work quite as well for me. And I think part of it is because I just felt like the relationship didn't have as much build to it. So, okay, I guess I should explain this. This is set in kind of an alternate fantasy version of the real world. So all of like the real world exists and there are like pop culture references and stuff like that, but there are like Dungeons and Dragons style magic and like races and classes and like all of this kind of stuff. And so in the first one, it was about our main character who was in graduate school and it was like an academic rivals to lovers. This one is following, I think Auric is the main character's name. He was the best friend of the main character in the first book. So now we're following his romance. And he plays it, wow, the words for this are escaping me, but I think the game is called like Raw Ball or something. It is their like sport. It is a sport that exists in this world. He is a professional player, a professional athlete, and he gets pulled into essentially a PR stunt where he has to pretend to be dating a cheerleader. But the cheerleader that he is dating has his own secrets. And so our main character is kind of instantly obsessed with him, and is like very instantly very protective, a little obsessive, a little possessive, and has to kind of like hold himself back because this is supposed to be like pretend PR relationship, but he like is in it for real. And so we are following, of course, their romance as they realize they have real feelings for each other. Now, I think that some of the things that didn't work as well for me is that our main character does kind of jump straight into these like very intense feelings with a lot that are like kind of obsessive, very possessive, all of that, which is not a trope that I personally love that much. So if those are tropes that you like, maybe it would like work better for you. But also I was like, I needed more build up to this relationship. However, it's one of those times where I'm like, there is an explanation for why his feelings get like so intense so quickly. These characters do have trauma in their history, which we learned about in the first book. And so there is like reason behind why he acts like this. But for me, just as a reader, even knowing that, it is still hard for me to feel as like fully invested in the relationship. And also, even if there are reasons on his end why he kind of feels so intensely so quickly, I feel like on the other guy's end, like he doesn't have that same like reason for that. So I still feel like maybe it needed a little more build up from the other character's perspective. Also, as they were doing this kind of like fake dating PR relationship, there was very little of the fake dating. They mention, they show us one date that they go on, and then they just kind of skip over and mention like, yeah, and then they kind of went on some other fake dates for PR. And I was like, I wanted to see that. That was the part that I needed to see to build up this relationship and like get the tension and like see them getting to know each other and all of this. And I just didn't get that, and I really wanted it. Yeah, so I don't know. Also, I will say another trope that this like really leaned into that just is not my jam was it was very into the like size difference between these two characters, because our main character I think is like half giant or something, and he is a professional athlete, so he's like this big guy. And then the other character, who is a cheerleader, is like very, well, I think in comparison everybody's kind of tiny, but my impression is that he's also just generally a fairly petite person. And so it really leaned into like just the huge size difference between these two characters, which is not a trope that I'm super into either. So again, maybe if that's a trope that you really enjoy, this would work better for you. But I gave this one, I think, 3.5 stars. Like, it's a fun world. I like the characters. There were things about it that I enjoyed, but it was not nearly as good as the first book. However, if there are more books in this series, I will for sure be reading them because I loved the first one so much. Like, I still have faith that there could be more in this series that I would be really into. Okay, so now we're into our fully contemporary romance books. I read, I think, 3 books by Anita Kelly. So I read the first book in the Nashville Love series. I read the third one either last month or the month, maybe it was 2 months ago. But I was finally able to get the first one from my library. So this is Love and Other Disasters. This is following 2 characters who are on a like competition cooking show together. And so our main characters are Delilah and London. London is non-binary. Delilah is recently divorced. And overall, I thought this was very fun. I liked both of the main characters. I don't particularly watch reality shows, competition shows, cooking shows, so like in that way this wasn't really checking boxes for me. However, I will say this year I've also gotten very into hockey romance, and I don't watch hockey at all, so I don't know. But the premise of it, I think for some people the premise of like the cooking competition show would really add to the whole premise of it, like the whole vibe of the book. That didn't really do a lot for me, but I did really enjoy these characters. However, I also will say that there were parts of this that I found kind of cringy. There were certainly like moments and conversations. There was also one of the sex scenes that I found pretty cringy. So, you know, it had some hits and misses. I gave this one 3.5 stars. But then I read Anita Kelly's other series that is a series of novellas that is called the Moonlighters trilogy, which is about this bar that has karaoke, and so each book kind of revolves in some way around karaoke, which was very fun. And this trilogy I had so much fun with. I really enjoyed these novellas much more than the Nashville Love trilogy so far. But okay, so in this one, the first book is, I'm looking at my notes, Sing Anyway. And in this one, another one where we have a non-binary main character. I have noticed in Anita Kelly's books, they seem to have a real pattern where they go like, first book in the trilogy, non-binary main character in the romance. Second book in the trilogy, it's an romance. Third book in the trilogy, sapphic romance. And that's how the setup of Nashville Love, also Moonlighters. They have another trilogy that I can't remember the name of, but from reading the description, I think that that is the order that it goes in that series too. So they have like a real like formula to it, but I'm not mad about it. I've been having fun reading their books. Anyway, so in Sing Anyway, We are following two characters who meet at karaoke. They have a one-night stand and then kind of go their separate ways, but both of them like each other, and so they have to kind of find their way back to each other. And some of the things that I liked about this, I also like that the characters are a little bit older, that they are in their 30s and 40s. I feel like I've been reading a lot of contemporary romance where characters are like in their 20s. So that was nice that they were like a little bit older. I also felt like these ones, there was a lot of like really endearing awkwardness. Like in Love and Other Disasters, there were things that were like cringy and I was not a fan. But in Sing Anyway, this one, it had this like endearing awkwardness that just felt it just felt kind of like realistic about moments that maybe would otherwise be much more like sexy and glossy and all of that, and it just was like a little more realistic and awkward, and it just was very endearing but not cringy, and I liked that a lot. The second one had a very similar quality to it, which I really enjoyed, and so that one was called Our Favorite Songs. Very cute. I love the trope of like characters who had crushes on each other in high school but never said anything and they reconnect as adults. So this is following two guys who kind of tangentially knew each other in high school. One of them was kind of like the popular jock and the other was more like quiet, moody, artsy kind of guy. And he did not like the other one at the time. And so they meet up through a mutual friend at karaoke years later as adults and reconnect. And one of the things that I particularly liked about these characters is that the character Kai or Kay, I don't remember, just feels like a very well-adjusted person with like a secure attachment style. And so I really enjoyed seeing his character just like step into those awkward moments, and that the moments where he felt scared or vulnerable and really just like was fully present with it and didn't run away from it, and it was just, I don't know, very endearing. I loved it. And then the third one is Wherever Is Your Heart, which is also again following older characters who I think are maybe in their 40s, maybe even 50s. I'm not sure if they say exactly how old they are. But it is following two like masked lesbians who, one of them works at the bar that the karaoke is at, and one of them is like a long haul trucker who every time she's in the area she stops at the bar, and they've kind of gotten to know each other over the years, and then they finally kind of like cross the threshold into like asking each other out and like going on a date. And this one was not my favorite in the trilogy. I think one of the things that made it like less engaging for me was just that because both of these characters kind of have these like gruff exteriors, and I felt like it was missing that same kind of vulnerability that the first two had. They did still have I think some good like moments of communication, and one of the things I did like about them was that I think they each felt very understood by the other, and I loved that for them. But it just like didn't have that same kind of endearing vulnerability that I was loving so much in the first two books. So the first two, I gave each of those 4.5 stars, and then the third one I gave 3.5 stars. But this series, especially those first two, just gave me that like feeling of like my heart is full. Like I just loved it. And also the second and third ones I read as ebooks, which very unusual for me to read an ebook, so they must have been pretty engaging to get me to read an ebook and actually stick with it. Then I read Roommate by Serena Bowen, which I picked up kind of on a whim. Serena Bowen was one of the authors that wrote the Him trilogy, which I really enjoyed last month, I think it was. And so when I was looking for a book to read, this one was available. It was the only one from her that was like available at the time, so I just listened to that one, even though it's like part of, it's kind of related to another series, although not technically part of it. Anyways, this is following our two main characters in Vermont. So one of these characters, his family has a farm in Vermont and he helps out his family, but he feels very out of place. He has some baggage, especially his relationship with his father, but he's trying to get out. He wants to kind of build a new life. Our other main character has just returned to Vermont. He had a kind of nasty breakup recently, is kind of starting a new life, kind of starting from scratch, and so he comes back to Vermont, and he gets a job at a coffee shop as a baker because he went to culinary school, and it happens to be the same coffee shop where our other main character works, and the two of them have a little bit of a sordid history from when they were in high school together. I won't get into the details, but they have a little bit of a history that makes things a little bit awkward between the two of them, but they eventually become roommates and then, of course, fall for each other. This one I really enjoyed. I felt like it had a really good like build to the relationship. One of them, the one who went to culinary school, teaches the other how to cook. I also think that as it kind of waded into the heavier and more emotional parts of the story where things got more complex and we get more into the difficulties in kind of the family backstories of our characters, I felt like it developed those parts of the story well as well. So I gave this one 4 stars. And then because I liked it and it was connected to this other series, I decided to go back and read the first book in the series that is kind of like a spin-off from, which is called Bittersweet. And in this one, we are following the cousin of one of our main characters from Roommate. And he is kind of taking care of his family farm. Our other main character knew him when they were in college together. She actually had left college, was cut off by her parents, went to culinary school, and is now trying to kind of make it in the culinary world. But in order to do that, she's kind of had to like pay her dues, and she's taken a really terrible job, which has now sent her on assignment to try and woo these Vermont farmers to sell produce to different like restaurants for ridiculous prices. And so this is sort of how she comes back around to seeing him again and they reconnect. And this one, this one wasn't very memorable for me. I think the characters were fine, the romance was all right. I just didn't feel like it had as much like build and depth to it. It also had, I don't know, it just felt like it fell into some like, not even full tropes, but just like there were some small interactions or like moments that I just was like, I don't like that. And so, I don't know, this wasn't one that really did much for me. I think I gave this either 3 or 3.5 stars. This one was like fun, it was fine, not very memorable, didn't leave much of an impression. And then finally, the last book that I have is Love Lettering by Kate Claiborne, I think. And in this, our main character is a like calligrapher, a hand letterer, I think. She specializes in hand lettering. And so she does, she for a while had worked in like wedding invitations and programs and brochures and things like that. When the book starts, a former groom from a couple that she had worked with shows up, tells her that they in fact did not get married, and one of the reasons why was because in one of the like programs that she made, she had hidden a secret message that only he noticed the pattern in her in the lettering that she had like put this message saying that the relationship was a mistake. And so he kind of wants to know, like, why, what did she see? Why did she do that? And so that brings these two characters together at a point when our main character also is really looking for inspiration. She's feeling very stuck. She also is looking for connection because she's having trouble with her best friend. He is very much a like numbers guy. She is very creative, so it's a bit of an opposites attract. And the two of them end up going on these walks around New York City and playing different games, looking at the lettering of different signage and to like gather inspiration. And that's kind of the basis of their, like, how they first connect. This is one I don't totally remember, but I think that maybe I had heard about it because it was on a list of recommendations for books with starchy heroes. And as we know, I have discovered I love a starchy hero. And I will say the main character in this is starchy. I think she even calls him starchy in the book. But there was something missing that it just like it. I still enjoyed him. I had fun with this. I liked both of them. But there was something that it wasn't peak starchiness for me, even though it is a trope that I love. To some extent, I feel like her, like she would envision, like as people said words, she would like see words and she'd be like, that word that he said was in big block letters. I could see it, you know? And that felt a little bit gimmicky to me, but not the worst. And there also was kind of like in the last, not the second half, but like the last like third or so, it kind of like took a weird turn that I wasn't expecting, and I didn't hate it, but I was just like, all right, that kind of came out of nowhere. But overall, like I had fun with it. Another one that wasn't super memorable for me, but I gave it 3.5 stars because I did enjoy it. All right, I feel like I have been talking forever. This is the problem with reading a lot of books in 1 month, but I would love to know, how is your May reading? What is your favorite thing that you read in May? And have you read any of these books? But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!